Hey everyone, welcome to another Third Apron podcast. I'm your host, Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. And I've got Sam back on, Sam Quinn from CBS Sports, and to talk about some of today's breaking news. Fred VanVleet tore his ACL. He's going to be out for the year. I don't think there's any sugarcoating it. This is a really horrible blow for the Rockets. Uh, if you had them as a contender in the West, like the top tier, I think this knocks them down for sure. I had them kind of below that. We'll get into where the hierarchy stands now. But for a team that already lacks creation and they among some other flaws that we'll probably dissect, I I think they're going to really struggle to generate offense, and this could really hurt their chances towards making the playoffs.
So I think everything you said is true. I do think Fred is uniquely very valuable to them because normally when you think of point guards like Fred, you think of them as kind of like secondary ball handlers on teams with other high-end ball handlers, right? Like the obvious comparison that comes to mind for me is Derek White being, well, I guess this year not, but being on Jason Tatum's team, where somebody like that is obviously very valuable and they bring a lot of subtle other things to the game, but they're not like primary ball handler types. But last year, Fred really was the primary ball handler for Houston. And when you pull him off, everybody else that could have the ball does come with some questions. I'm very bullish about Amin Thompson, not just growing in his third year, but taking more ball handling possessions. That's still a pretty big question. His game, it frankly, needs a lot more polish. Kevin Durant is great, but Kevin Durant is 36, and Kevin Durant is more of a flow of the offense guy than a run your offense through him kind of guy. You're not going to run 40 pick and rolls a game with Kevin Durant. You can do more with Alperen Şengün, but it's kind of going to be a by committee sort of thing as far as replacing him. At least for now, we'll talk about potential moves they could make. The first thought that comes to mind for me is that at the very least, they are pretty uniquely qualified to overcome an injury like this. It's pretty rare to have a player this important for whom you used a number 3 overall pick on somebody at their position a year earlier. Having Reed Shepard is, I think, hopefully going to be somewhat insulating for them. And if nothing else, like obviously no injury is good for a team, but a silver lining here is that I think you could have seen a world where Ime Udoka didn't play him just as he didn't last year because there are the fears about the defense because he's not like a fully matured, fully realized veteran, and Ime Udoka is not somebody who tends to lean on young guys. Amin Thompson was kind of the exception last year. Now that's kind of out the window. Reed is going to have to play a pretty significant role for them to be in that same tier in the West. I'm optimistic about him, but you're now going from a guy who was going to be a backup who played to start the year 10 to 15 minutes a game to somebody now who I think is probably going to play 2025 at least. And we'll see if he really blows up, if this works, if he's worth the number 3 overall pick they used on him. I'm bullish on him, and we can talk about some of the reasons why. But that was the first thing that came to mind for me was we're going to get a lot more Reed Shepard. We're probably going to get more Amin Thompson. And the one other little silver lining for Houston is that even though they did have a championship window this year, and I'm not prepared to say it's closed, that championship window is not a 1 year thing. It's not a 2 or 3 year thing. We presume, for a variety of reasons, that Houston is going to be able to contend for the next 5, 7, 8. I'm throwing out random numbers here, but you get it. Like they have a long window, and losing VanVleet for 1 year does not change that. And if anything, you could argue getting a better look at Shepard and at Thompson in bigger roles could be pretty instructive for them and help them down the line. So there are some silver linings here, but in the short term, yeah, it's pretty significant.
So let's go over the silver linings and the fact that this does, one, put a lot of pressure on their backcourt guys, Reed and Amen, but also the Rockets will now get some definitive answers on these guys. I think this puts a lot of pressure on Reed. I don't know exactly what if he's going to start. I would anticipate that the starters are definitely going to include Amen, Jabari, KD, Alperen, Şengün, and then that last one. I guess we'll see if I think they'd love if Reed is ready to start. Uh, and he and Amen are both kind of like the uh, point guards, so to speak. Otherwise, maybe they just if Reed's not quite there, then it'd be Amen, and then I would guess Dorian Finney-Smith or Tyrese in one of them. So with Reed, I think now this puts a lot of pressure on him to just see if he can even be a rotation player this year, and if not, then that's probably going to put a lot of doubt into what kind of player he could be. I'm optimistic that he will be able to play in the rotation, but now he's going to be put into that position. He's going to probably play a good amount of minutes, and that's now he's going to have to prove it. With Amen, when he got drafted, what his long term position was it still is up in the air, and point guard was one of the positions that was considered. Now I think like last year they were trying to make him. He played a lot of four. I think once. I forgot who got injured last year, and then he ended up
Jabari got
playing.
hurt last year, and then he came
Okay,
back and he lost his starting job, didn't he?
yeah, so he was playing like 3 and 4. So it seemed like Amen was that's kind of where he was destined to be like a forward. I think that is what his long term position is now. He was before this Fred injury, it's the two. They're gonna have him probably play the two. Now he's gonna have to play a lot of one. So I think now we're also gonna get to find out if he could be a point guard long term, or at least play a good amount. I think he could play some. We'll see how much he could play. But but aside from those two things, I do want to just touch on Fred's value to the Rockets because there's some people I talk to that are very mixed on Fred as a player. And if you want to compare him to what his value would be to some other teams, if you have a above average point guard elsewhere, chances are that you might feel more comfortable with that player's shooting consistency, uh, availability. His value to the Rockets, though, is immense. Not only because of the archetype, where the Rockets have a clearly like they want to under Ime Udoka have a defensive first foundation, and Fred helps fit that, and we'll probably be able to figure out some names they could target to replace Fred going forward. Um, but they had their worst. If it wasn't their worst stretch of the year last year, it definitely was one of the worst. When he missed, I believe, like 15, 16 games. I looked it up. They went 8 and 9. So I don't know how to add 8 plus 9. I always with that 17. Or 15. They games whatever however long he missed. They basically treaded 500, and that's kind of what I'm expecting the Rockets to do now. I could be wrong, but I feel like they're gonna struggle to kind of stay above water. I feel like they have a lot of the same problems the Mavs have now. Where okay, you have a lot of big physical players. You're loaded on one of the more valuable positions, but you don't have enough creation right now. As I look at this roster to make it work, so I'm a lot more bearish on the Rockets now going forward. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on them to make some type of move. I'm sure they're already thinking about what they could do. But when you look at the roster, almost everyone that they have fits a certain role, a certain need, even though they have an abundance of forwards. Uh, I think they're probably going to look seriously at moving Fred now that he's effectively dead money on the books. And especially with the pressure of trying to win at a high level this year. Uh, yeah, you bet my mind already started working on seeing what type of move the Rockets could do with their surplus of picks to get a new guard.
Okay, first things first, you're way too low on them. Like that you can say they're going to be worse, They're not going to hover around 500. Don't compare them to the Mavericks. They have three creators still that are better than any offensive creator the Mavericks have, right? Okay, Durant is certainly better than anyone the Mavericks have. Şengün offensively is better than anyone the Mavericks have. And then Amen versus Anthony Davis. I guess we're gonna say Anthony Davis is the best creator the Mavs have. Like, I'm pretty dubious that you can really run an offense through Anthony Davis, but that's probably what they're gonna do. I think depending on where Amen ends up this year, I think there's a chance he could be a better offensive player than Davis. There's still a pretty meaningful gap between those teams. What as far as their hierarchical placement, like you could say they've maybe slipped below the Lakers into that Timberwolves, Clippers kind of group, Warriors. I personally am still pretty optimistic about them. Like you talk about what position does Amen play? I think the answer is point forward, right? Where you're going to list him as a forward and you're going to play smaller players than him, but he's going to have the ball a lot. Like he's not going to function the way that a power forward does. Like the extreme end of the spectrum is Giannis. Giannis, quote unquote, is a power forward, but he doesn't do the stuff that other power forwards do. I think one of the main advantages of having Fred VanVleet is that he can play point guard without playing point guard, right? This is something that, like, over the last 10 or 15 years, as more and more teams have built their offenses around wings and sometimes even centers, it's really useful to have a point guard sized person who can defend point guards, who can do some of your point guard stuff on offense, but is also pretty comfortable scaling down as far as usage goes. And there was a world, I think, where Amon took a jump this year, and Fred did take something of a backseat, especially with Durant there too. I'm not saying losing Fred isn't significant. I am saying I think Amen is going to take that jump. And one of the advantages of potentially slotting Reed Shepard in, if he is going to play a bigger role, is that you feel kind of less of an obligation to put the ball in Reed's hands. You feel less of an obligation to really run offense for him. You can make him an off ball player and just sort of let Amin soar and Durant and Şengün as well, obviously. It's kind of useful if you're going to have a primarily off ball player, as Fred, I think, will be long term, who is not somebody with the status that Fred has. I am very, very interested to see where they are. I'm not going to peg them as like, oh, they're this kind of team or that kind of team until I actually see them play. I'm actually looking at this Reed Shepard thing and I'm thinking, I would probably start him for a few reasons. Number one, I think he's somebody, his shooting amplifies good players more than it lifts up bad players. Like, if you have him running screens, running around the floor while Amen is attacking the basket and Şengün is doing his thing and Durant is doing this thing, yeah, you don't have one perfect offensive player, but you have a lot of guys that are really good at sort of a more narrow job definition and protecting the paint when Amen is driving versus watching out for Durant, watching out for Şengün, and then, oh, by the way, Reed is running his little marathon around screens. If he's making shots, that's really, really dangerous. Yeah, he didn't shoot well as a rookie. I would say a big reason for that is that he barely played, and then it's really hard to get a rhythm as a shooter if you're popping off the bench for 6 minutes in the second quarter and then calling it a night. So I think he's somebody who should scale up very well. He makes more sense in a bigger role. The defensive concerns are legitimate there. He is very small. There are going to be guys that bully him. What he did really well at Kentucky was be a defensive playmaker. Generated a million steals, he blocked shots, really good at generating turnovers. If you have Amen guarding the best player, and then you have Dorian Finney-Smith, and you have Tari Eason and Jabari, you have all these other big rangy wings who are going to be doing a lot of other things. That gives you a little bit more room to freelance with Reed and like use him more as a defensive playmaker than as somebody who's going to be like guarding a significant on-ball role. You can deny switches really well with all the bigger wings that they have. So I'm pretty bullish on Reed Shepard stepping into that role, and I'm pretty bullish on Amen growing into like maybe an all-star this year. I think they're still like I had them as a clear number three in the West before this. I think right now they've maybe slipped to where they're right around where the Lakers are, where those are 3 and 4, and maybe the Lakers are a little bit better. Maybe the Rockets are a little bit worse. We'll see. I'm still generally pretty optimistic about this team. I would not knock them down nearly to the extent that you have. The other question that I have, and it's a little bit more niche, is that the Rockets like to run kind of weird lineups, right? The big thing they did last year were the double bigs with Şengün and Steven Adams. And my initial thought was, wow, you really want to have a point guard for those lineups? Let me check the data. And I checked on cleaning the glass, and it turns out Fred VanVleet actually wasn't really on the floor that much with the double bigs. It was 197 possessions without Fred VanVleet and then 137 with him. They were actually much better when they were without Fred, when it was Jalen Green and Amen Thompson. That was a little bit encouraging to me. The other thing that I wanted to see this year, especially as Amen took another step, were super small lineups. I know it's kind of weird to have a team that can do both, but if you looked at the Rockets personnel, they could in fact do both, right? They can go five out and they could also go double big. I wanted to see a lot of lineups where Amen was the ball handler and you had Jabari at center, Durant at the four, and then two other shooters around him. That's going to be a lot harder to try without Fred VanVleet. There's also just a maturity that you lose when you have somebody like Amen really taking a big playmaking role in your offense. There's something very useful about having a veteran around just to kind of grab the steering wheel during those like four, five, six possessions in a fourth quarter where things are kind of going crazy and maybe the other team has made a couple shots in a row and the crowd's going wild. It's really nice to have a veteran of that caliber around to say that we're going to slow it down. We're going to run a very simple play and we're going to get an easy bucket. That was Mike Conley's value to Minnesota for several years. I think Mike Conley's now declined, but when Anthony Edwards was still coming into his own, it was really useful for them when things were going wrong for Conley to just to slow things down and say, I'm going to run pick and roll with Rudy Gobert here. We're going to get an easy bucket. It's going to be fine. Just calm down. That's a big thing that they've lost, especially when you're talking about playing in playoff series against Jokic and against Oklahoma City. But broadly speaking, I'm still pretty high on the Rockets. I would not put them any lower than fourth in the West, even without VanVleet.
I would say that their playoff viability hasn't changed. I think that the type of players that they have, the all the size, all these wings, that's great for the playoffs. I'm still though concerned about them being able to win enough regular season games with the unless Reed and Amen can really help overcome this creation void, because like I think that's really important to win regular season games. Uh, if both of them can help fill that void, then yeah, absolutely. Then nothing really changes that significantly. I just think it's a lot it's a lot to ask for. I need to see it first, especially from Reed. I'm sure he could be all NBA this year, but it not doesn't necessarily mean he can help fill the creation that Fred left. The way you describe the Rockets, though, like your optimistic view, it's kind of like they're kind of like Orlando West, where Orlando, you can look at all their top guys and they can all do a little bit of creation. But ultimately, kind of similar to the Rockets, they have one guy, dad, God, Jalen Suggs, who they really depended on him for his creation. And once he was out, then the whole thing fell apart. It didn't really matter how many guys that they had who could help here and there. And that's and seeing how the Rockets struggled without Fred and this kind of trend, I that's kind of where I'm feeling where I just as far as the regular season goes, I'm not feeling too confident. So let's just see.
There's an
Yeah, let's see what
immediate
happens.
there's immediately a pretty big difference between those teams, Josie. One of them has Kevin Durant. Like, do you think the Magic might have been able to score a little bit better if they had Kevin Durant? I think the answer to that is yes.
No, that's true. Uh, but either way, I just need to see it first. I'll remain pretty bearish, and I think the Rockets are gonna either way though. I think we could agree the Rockets are gonna have to do something. Like even if they are able to do a lot better than anticipated, I just cannot see them. Like now here, so let's move on to the next thing. Fred, I believe he's like my age, 31, 32.
30.
Uh, this is a pretty major injury. How confident are we that he's gonna come back from this like in a similar form as he was before. So that's another thing that the Rockets do need to evaluate. But if I would say if they are playing. So let me ask you this. Do you think they're more likely to make a trade involving him to get more backcourt help if they are doing better than expected or if they're doing a little worse than they hoped?
Better, because I think what they're really trying to evaluate is this a championship caliber year? If the answer is yes, let's go all in. But that's also going to be contextual, where if they say like, yeah, we think we are a normal championship caliber team, but we look and we see Oklahoma City is it's the deadline and they're like 51-10 or something, then they might be a little bit more cautious and say like, you know what? Maybe this isn't the season to go all in. Let's let them get a couple years deeper where they're paying their apron years and their tax years and blah, blah, blah. And then we'll strike then. I think that's probably the more likely scenario. Would have to be, they'd have to not only believe they're a championship caliber team, but they'd have to look at Oklahoma City and Denver and say, like, we think they're gettable now and we want to roll with it. When they traded for Kevin Durant, I never looked at that as an all in thing. I never looked at that as like a we have to win the championship right now thing. I looked at that as he's so cheap that there's really no reason not to do this. Let's try and we'll see. And we'll take a swing at winning the 2026 championship. But the core plan of a long term build around Shengun and Thompson and maybe another big trade or even just holding on to those picks and saying, you know what? We're going to see between all the Phoenix picks we have and this net swap we have in 27 and the Mavericks pick in 29 and all of that, we think we're going to get one or two really bright young stars in the lottery. Like, I don't think they ever really accelerated the timeline. I think they were just like, this Hall of Famer who does exactly what we need is available and very cheap. There's kind of no reason not to do it. So I don't think they're going to be super eager to just make a move like, yeah, yeah, we're all in. This is a championship here. I think if they overperform or if the rest of the West looks vulnerable, like I hate to bring this up, but like if Oklahoma City has a similar injury and like we get to January 1st and it's Chet Holmgren who has suffered a season-ending injury, then the Rockets probably go, yeah, like now's the time. We've got our shot. Let's take it. But if they're just like a 4 or 3 seed and they've got a puncher's chance, but they're not like overwhelming favorites or anything, I think they sit pat. And if they're having a bad year, I think they just kind of wash their hands of this and say, like, we're not, why bother? We have such a long runway. Why waste this? I am curious about Fred's long-term role in the team if he's not traded. You brought up like where does the injury affect him long term? He's an older guy. I want to bring up Kyrie Irving because I do think I've been on the more negative end with how is he going to come back from his ACL than the Mavericks, who seem to think like he's going to arrive on February 1st as 2019 Kyrie Irving and all will be well. Like, I don't think that's going to happen for a few reasons. Obviously, Kyrie is a little bit older. I think he's 33 this season. I think I'd have to check. He's a little bit older. His game is also a little bit more. I'm trying to think of the right
I
word.
mean,
Is
Kyrie's an
aerodynamic?
all-time great. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Fred's
But I'm
not
making a
never
broad
been.
point here.
I don't.
Like,
I just want to say I do think that distinction matters. Where like some of these guys that are at that level, they tend to have higher primes. They come back from these types of injuries better. Fred's not quite at that level. I mean, he's
no,
not at
but
that
they
level.
have very
So
different playing styles, is the point I
yeah,
want to make. Which is Kyrie, like, if he loses 5 to 10% of his athleticism off of this ACL, that's really, really significant for him, given just like the dexterity that he has, how maneuverable he is in tight quarters. If he loses a little bit of burst, if he loses a little bit of its jump, that's meaningful. I don't know that that's quite the case with Fred because he just doesn't really dribble inside of the paint, right? Like Fred's game is it's not stationary, he's a point guard, but I think it's a lot more he's kind of he always aside from shooting all the threes, he does kind of have an old man game and defensively he's got a lot of that Kyle Lowry in him where he's a very good defender, but a lot of that value on defense is coming in the fact that he can hold his own against bigger guys. He's not going to get back down in the post. He can switch. That's less the sort of thing that I worry about being affected by an ACL. And then also just around the league, ACLs have tended recently to be a slightly more manageable injury than obviously an Achilles, like, and then certain other things like a back or like a foot. The ACL is not nearly as damaging as it was 15 years ago. I think Fred is going to come back as a starting level point guard. Will he be worse? Yes. Do I think that's entirely because of the ACL? No. I think it's more when a 31-year-old misses the season, he comes back, he is then 32 years old, and 32-year-olds tend to be worse than 31-year-olds. So I think he'll be a little bit worse. I am very curious as we do get into some of the trade stuff how other teams are going to value him. And there's one team in particular that I'm very eager to talk about that would actually look at this injury on a variety of levels as almost more valuable to them. Um, I think, especially also that he only has the one guaranteed year if you assume he's picking up his option. You trade him like in the middle of this season, you're not taking on a 4 year deal. You're getting him for basically the 26-27 season. And to get a 32-year-old for 1 year at that point, like, I think that's generally worth a flyer. That's reasonably valuable. So I'm pretty optimistic about Fred. I don't think his game is going to degrade in the way that maybe other guys would with injuries. I do see your concern, though. It's not nothing.
It's just something that I think the Rockets are going to have to internally discuss, and a lot of that will probably just come down to opportunity. Uh, I agree with you, though. I think they're more likely to make a move involving him, which means that you're going to be aggressive. You're going to involve multiple picks. If they're a top three seed, they're really overachieving. Based on like that would mean that Amon and Reed are both playing to the expectations, and they probably just could use one more guard to replace what Fred would have brought. Not even necessarily that. Like I think they're gonna probably go for that type of player, if possible. Um, so with Fred, I just say like most likely, I think we both agree that if they are going to try to bring in a starting level guard to replace him, the trade probably is going to involve him. Right
I have
now,
ideas that involve him
yeah,
and ideas that
yeah.
don't. I've got a whole bunch we can go through if you want.
And the reasons because no matter what, they're going to have to be patient. Right now, they can't even sign a guard off the to if they want a Russell Westbrook or someone just to be a stopgap option. They can't even do that right now. They can only that's because they're right up against the first apron. They can't even sign a player right now. They would have to either make a trade to save money or just do a trade to get that type of player. But the only players that are trade eligible are all very important right now. So they're gonna have to wait until at least December 15th once most free agents become available for trade. Because then at the very least they could try to trade one of their minimum guys, whether that's Jeff Green or Aaron Holiday, Jay Sean Tate, to try to get a different minimum player at the very least if they wanted to do that direction, just like a very minimal option. Um, but if they're looking to do something to be a little more aggressive, uh, either way, they're gonna have to wait till then because then, because right now they can only trade Durant, Şengün, Jabari Smith, Amon Thompson, Reed Shepard, Tyrese, and I would guess they're not interested in really moving any of those guys. Uh, which brings me back to Fred. He will become trade eligible. I'm pretty sure December 15th, like most other free agents. And it's worth noting he does have veto rights on a trade because he signed a 1+1. He's got that player option next year. And I think we should definitely just touch on that because it could be meaningful, but I think it also might not be. Where it might factor in is if he doesn't like the destination. But the reason he's got the implicit no trade clause of veto rights is because when you sign a 1+1 or a 1 year deal, you can if you get traded, you allow the team to trade you. Your new team doesn't have your bird rights, so he has that as a way to protect his bird rights. I don't think protecting bird rights will matter too much, and that's twofold. One, he's probably going to pick up that player option at this point because he's injured. He's not going to play this year. He's probably going to pick it up. But the other thing is that because he picks it up, then he'll it won't matter that he let the trade happen. He only loses the bird rights is if he gets traded and then he declines the player option, becomes a free agent in 2026. So really, the only thing that is gonna be the only part of the no trade clause that's gonna matter is if he just doesn't want to go to the team. And I I just kind of feel like that might not be too important because if the Rockets make it clear that they want to trade him, then okay, he might as well just not stay there. They don't plan on trading. They don't plan on having a future around him. So
Well,
he
there's
can
something
just
else to that as well, which is that he might look at the way that Amen is playing and maybe Reed is playing, or if they do make another trade, and say, even if I'm on the team in a year, I might be coming off of the bench. And then I'd be a 32-year-old backup going into my contract year. I think it will be very important for Fred to be a starter going into the 26-27 season. I think in a perfect world, he'd like that to be with the Rockets. But if the Rockets, either because they trade for somebody or because the internal young guys have kind of seized the role, if he's looking at being a backup for the Rockets, I think he would gladly go and be a starter for somebody else just so he can keep his value high going into free agency in 2027.
right. No, that makes sense. So I would say if the Rockets do find a trade, though, I don't really see him having too much of a problem, uh, you know, making it happen. So with all that put in place, I think it's fair to just touch on some. Should we start with the actual trades, or should we start with like some potential targets that
Here's what I want
just
to do. I have a list of 9. I know the trade you want to make, so it's last. I'm going to make you build to it. I've got 9 ideas here. They range in severity from like and not too interesting to like, okay, let's have a conversation about this. Let's just go down the list and let's see where it takes us. Here's the most obvious one, or not the most obvious. Here's the like the simplest. I bet you they'd probably be interested. Fred VanVleet for Cam Thomas. I think that would be like fair. When I say I think they'd be interested, I think it's the Nets, to be clear, because they clearly don't have Fred VanVleet in their plans. And I think that there are a lot of 3-team structures where Fred makes a lot of sense for the Nets specifically because they're trying to tank this season when Fred won't be playing, but they don't control their pick in 26-27 when Fred will be playing. So the idea of having Fred then is actually kind of appealing to them, so that's why they came up as a team that might be interested. You could save a whole bunch of money if you made a trade like this with the Nets. I don't know what their cap space situation is. Maybe they'd have to include a little bit more money. I have not run numbers on any of these, but that was the first one that came to mind. If they're just like, screw it, let's get a bucket and like not include anything else in the trade, at all feasible to you?
for Brooklyn, yes. I don't think Houston does that though.
I think I'm
Um,
with you on that.
uh, that doesn't help solve. I don't think Cam's helping them uh, meaningfully create add to their playmaking. Um,
Yeah, he's
yeah, like
just a
they could.
bucket.
He's a much cheaper Jalen Green. But yeah, no, I understand though. I think for Brooklyn that would make a lot of sense. I think bringing in Fred to get to the user cap space, the rest of their cap space, and then they have between him, Porter trying to flip them later. But even then, uh, not a lot of adults in the room. I don't even know. Like, is there like an adult in the room in Brooklyn that you feel like for this particular year you feel good about? Like, Fred being there would be great for
Yeah.
all their young players. So in
This
that
was a
sense, I think he brings a lot of value.
This was a laying the foundation fake trade. I never believed you were going to be into it, but we're going to come back to Fred VanVleet to Brooklyn later. Second idea.
Yeah.
I think Nate Duncan was the first person who suggested this like back in May, and then it came across my Twitter a couple times today. Austin Reeves for Jabari Smith.
Um, Interesting. Um, Complicated because of the poison pill provision with Jabari. Probably need to get a third team involved. I think the Lakers absolutely say yes to this, even despite them trying to preserve their cap flexibility for the next 2 years.
Oh, Jabari's going to be so much cheaper than Austin starting next year.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's right. I totally forgot about
So
that.
this would actually save them money in the long run. Now, you could argue
Yeah,
that Jabari would have less trade value as they pursue a star than Austin would. I think that's subjective. That'll be a team by
yeah.
team thing.
Now
It
I'll just
certainly makes them more well-rounded this year.
I will say I'm saying I don't know if the Lakers actually do. I think the Lakers should do it for sure.
Mhm.
I really like it for them. I don't. I think there's a lot more upside with Jabari going forward, and yeah, he is cheaper than Austin. He will be cheaper than Austin. That's a good point. Um, and like, what are I don't think the Lakers will have a. They probably won't have another chance at getting a guy with quite this level of upside with what they have to offer. So if that was on the table, I think they should take it. For Houston, I guess it depends. If they start to have some cold feet about the contract they just gave him, because a lot of their shooting, the theory of their shooting, like really depends on Jabari being able to make them. Like they gave him really good third, borderline fourth best player on the team money. And the way I saw that contract, that he needs to at least be better than be taking more shots than Fred VanVleet. Like try to be, can you at least be a better option on offense than Fred VanVleet? And now we're not going to get to really find that out. But if he can be really, either way for Houston, like that's just like a whole nother thing about that contract. I'm a little more down on that contract than most, but uh, yeah, I like it more for the Lakers. I doubt the Rockets would do that despite their that Austin would be a nice fit there. And if they have like if Reed Shepard can pan out, like that's that could be an archetype he becomes. So Houston, I would say Houston probably passes on this one.
Yeah, I think the Lakers wouldn't too. Internally, they just love him too much, but it's something that I've seen thrown around a fair bit.
Yeah,
Okay, imagine this.
that's a good one though. I like them. I like that one.
It's 4 days before the trade deadline, February 1st, something like that, whatever the date is. The NBA announces that Kawhi Leonard's contract has been voided and the Clippers have been stripped of a significant amount of draft picks. The Rockets call them and they say Fred VanVleet, Dorian Finney-Smith, and like one good first round pick for James Harden.
Fred and DFS for Harden. Um,
You know Durant would love it.
this actually kind of makes sense. If the Clippers are in that position where they got the hammer, they lose
Yeah.
draft picks, lose Kawhi, I think they Clippers would kind of have to do that deal at that point. And even though you're bringing in, okay, you're bringing in a year of like this basically means you're burning your 2026 cap space plans. Like there's no one available for 2026, whatever. But even with Dorian Finney-Smith on that contract, that's non-guaranteed after next year, so they could still pursue 2027. Uh, as much as these cap space plans, they never really amount to much. The Clippers could do this trade. They gain a first, and they could still preserve their cap space. Houston, I I don't think I feel like they probably would aim for a different type of target.
I agree.
I agree where you're heading with this. I think there is a package that they could put. There is like they could make this a package, but Harden's definitely not the target.
I know the trade you want to make. We're going to get there. I promise. Just be patient.
But yeah,
Reed
fans of Third
Shepard,
Apron know what the trade is I want to make.
Reed Shepard and Clint Capella for Kobe White and Julian Phillips.
Reed and Capella for Kobe White, and then Phillips as a Phillips.
Heads up on this, by the way, I'm gonna put a lot of Clint Capella into deals, and the reason I'm doing
Yeah,
that is that those minimum guys that the Rockets have, their cap numbers are just so low that they're not really going to affect trades. And the reason the Rockets have Clint Capella is they want him to ease Steven Adams' regular season burden, and that's nice. But these trades would likely happen in February when most of the regular season is over. So at that point, you can be like, we got what we wanted out of Capella. Now let's use his cap number for something else if we're going to make a big trade. But anyway, Kobe White is this target.
Are the Rockets throwing in a first?
No, I'm saying Reed Shepard as a number three pick is valuable enough. But the thing about this is, if
Oh,
Reed
hold on,
plays
hold on. I'm
well,
sorry. I misunderstood the trade. You said it's Reed and Capella.
yes.
Okay.
The interesting thing about this is if Reed plays well, the Rockets wouldn't make this trade. But if Reed plays badly, the Bulls would demand a first. And I don't think either. I don't think that they're likely to. I don't think Reed's value is likely to come together on this in a way that makes this trade viable. But I like the idea of Kobe White as a guy for them.
Yeah, I just I would see if the Rockets could try to do this trade without including Reed. If you can put in Dorian Finney-Smith instead of as a salary filler and then throw in a first, I think that might be a little more so what they're going for. However, you got to pay Kobe White next year. Um, so then if you so is he going to be the Fred replacement? In that case, okay, then you can make the money work a little more. I don't know. You know what? Maybe I'm making a big deal out of the fact they got to pay Kobe. But that's what I would try to do. Just I'm trying to add to the creation. I'm not trying to. But I think you got pretty close there. That's an interesting one.
This is just they don't have any bad first round picks, which makes like smaller trades harder. But like staying with the Bulls, something like Capella and some bad first round pick, like their 2028 pick with some protection or something for Ayo Dosunmu. And Ayo Dosunmu would like be a very Ime Udoka player as a guard who like is pretty physical and pretty defensive. He's not going to replace what Fred does on offense, but he's a good offensive player all the same. And you can do that below the hard cap just fine. Like I only make 7.5 million. So that's another one I would throw out there.
Yeah. No, you could definitely put him in there.
We're gonna
Uh,
start to get into some of the bigger names from here. Just two old dudes for you. Ready? Fred VanVleet and Clint Capella. I'm gonna option number one, CJ McCollum. Option number two, Drew Holiday. And if you have to include some picks in there, fine. But like basic
okay.
structures there.
Okay. Uh, CJ. If you don't have to include a pick, I think that's something that is worth considering. Holiday is someone I definitely considered, and because I think that if the Rockets seriously do explore a Fred trade, I would suspect they're going to have a talk with Portland about Holiday. I think he he's a much he has he's much better in the attributes that Fred has in terms of like a lot of the way you describe him defensively. Um, I I would and that would definitely change my perception. I think everyone's perception of that trade for Portland if they were able to pull off this deal later, where you're trading Anthony Simons, who okay, right now he doesn't have any value, but you're trading him for a player who's much older, much more expensive. Uh, and I think this trade just kind of goes down to what where's Portland by the trade deadline. If they're playing really, really well, they probably wouldn't do this. Like I'm talking if they're like in play-in range and maybe even above it, like seven, or maybe it's just like on the cusp of being above the play-in range. If they're like a 7 or 8 seed, I would guess that Portland doesn't do it. But let's say they are kind of similar last year, flirting with the plane like a 9-10 seed, maybe worse. Uh, then I would imagine that they would seriously consider it. And if you can get a first out of that, so you get Fred, I guess Capella, and then I guess it kind of goes down to what is that first. We'd even discuss at the Rockets, they still have two Suns picks, one in 2027 and one in
Not a chance
2029.
for Drew Holiday. Not a
But yeah,
chance.
and then they have all their own first round picks. I think getting any first, if you're Portland, that would make the acquisition of Drew look a lot better, and just to get a first for that contract, and especially you're only getting back. Like the money you're getting back is pretty menial. Like Clint Capella, that's just like below mid-level money, and then Fred's only got another year on that contract. Who, by the way, could kind of be a pseudo Drew, have that veteran role for next year. Not as good as Drew, but to have him there next year, making a lot less, to be that have that veteran role, but also he could be potentially a starter depending on where Scoot is. But that he if he does take a meaningful step back next year, could be a really good fit coming off the bench of Portland. I think this one makes a lot of sense. But
I
if
are we
Houston and if but I'll just cap off the CJ thing where if Houston just does not want to trade a pick, I think I'd probably do that if I'm Houston.
I personally this I don't think the league is caught up on this yet. I kind of think Drew's washed, or at least is well on his way to becoming washed. And I don't even need a pick. If I can just get out of the last year of that contract, I know that like they just traded for it a few months ago. I would also point out that the team just sold, and I feel like the new owner is going to come in and look at their balance sheet and be like, why are we paying Drew and Jeremy Grant for the next 3 years? Can we get out of one of these contracts, please? Like, I would just look at that as a huge win if I could get out of the last year of the Drew deal. I don't think Drew really makes much sense. I just don't think Drew is as good anymore as most people still seem to think that he is. So yeah, I think the league, we'll see if the league catches up on that or if Drew has a bounce back. But last year was just not very good for Drew. I would not be super interested in trading for him right now. This is the
Yeah,
last one before we get to the
I just think
what?
Houston would have interest. Udoka. Oh no, he didn't coach Drew. Never mind. But still, like
Um,
that is the archetype they would want for sure.
Fred VanVleet and Reed Shepard for Tyler Hero and Pella Larson.
Oh, interesting.
Just jump in the
Brett,
tank, Miami. You know you want to.
I don't know if Houston. I
I don't
don't
know if
think.
Houston would do it either.
Keep in mind, Tyler is about to become extension eligible, um, but Tyler does have another year left on his contract. Do you want if you're bringing him in? You're now he's making like 30 mil a year. He's probably going to push for at least 40 mil a year on that next deal. I think Tyler's pretty properly paid right now, so I do worry about that next contract. Um, I kind of like similar with Reeves and Reed, where the Rockets could be like, oh, we don't need Austin Reeves. We've got one in Reed Shepard. They might feel high enough on him where they feel the same way. Like, yeah, we don't need Tyler Hero. We've got an up and coming one in Reed.
I mean, it's another one of those things where if Reed plays well, they're just going to be like, yeah, we're good. We don't need Tyler Hero. And if Reed plays
Yeah,
badly, the Heat would just say, no, we're not interested. Give us those Suns picks
yeah.
and they get laughed out of the room.
So
But enough foreplay on this. I know the
yeah,
trade you want to make, so let's just do it.
yeah. I would say
Derek
both
White
teams say no to this. By the way, this Houston Miami one.
Derek White to Houston, Fred VanVleet and Clint Capella to Brooklyn, Terrence Mann and picks to Boston. We can talk about what those picks would be, but I think from Boston's angle, they would just be trying to duck the tax here. Obviously, they want to get a bunch of picks as well. So that's why we have to loop in Brooklyn. But as we covered earlier, Brooklyn, I think, would be pretty interested in getting Fred VanVleet. They would also, I think, shave a year off the contract of Terrence Mann if they did this. So we can talk about what the picks are, but I know that the trade you want to make is Derek White to Houston. So go speak your mind.
Hold on. So you're getting Brooklyn involved there. Are they taking Fred?
They're taking Fred and Clint Capella, and they're sending out Terrence Mann. So Boston is going from Derek White's cap number, which is 28, I think, to Mann, who's like 15. So they're
Okay.
saving like $13 million, which either gets them below the tax or gets them close enough that they could figure
Okay.
it out with a Sam Hauser dump or something with Simons or whatever. But this would be a precursor on Boston's end to
Okay.
dumping the tax. Plus, they
Yeah.
would get a bunch of picks that they could then, spin off in the offseason to kind of get back when Tatum is ready. But the whole goal here primarily is, aside from getting the picks, we're ducking the tax.
So very inconsequential point I'm about to make. I would suspect Boston would not one man because he's got that extra couple of years left on his
I think
deal.
that's worth it if you're ducking
Uh,
the tax, though. Like
but
that's
but uh, and I'm just saying, I think they'd try to make it okay. Give us Dayron, Sharp, Zaire Williams, Haywood has high speed, just like the expiring guy. I'm just gonna. It's very like inconsequential point I'm making as I like make this deal. That's just something that ranked in my head. But yes, back in June when it was the eve of free agency, or maybe it was like the first day of free agency, and Boston had just traded Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, and they're still looking to save money. And Shams said on ESPN how the Celtics are listening to offers on both Jaylen Brown and Derek White. It's going to take a haul to move them. And I still think that Derek White makes a whole lot of sense for Houston. You got the Ime Udoka connection there. Um, and now with the Fred injury, you can bet that if Houston is interested in Derek White, that uh, that offer just now is going to get a whole lot bigger if you're Boston. Um, so yeah, that is basically the trade I came up with. Derek White does have a trade bonus, so I do think because of that, Capella does need to get involved. The money basically needs to be mostly even, and I hadn't considered that aspect about Boston trying to get under the tax in that deal. Maybe they'll have already figured out a way to do it, but in any case, had they not, yes, I would guess Brooklyn is involved, and one Houston pick goes to Brooklyn for their troubles. So what I we agree on the fit. On uh we agree on that aspect. What do you think at this point would be the requisite amount of picks to get something like this done?
well, there's the amount, but there's also the specific picks involved. Boston would not do this without getting at least one of the Suns picks. And if I were Houston, the Suns picks would be off of the table. I would just say those picks are only getting traded if we're going for Giannis or somebody like that. So I think they would have a very hard time bridging that gap. But if you told me it was like Boston ducks the tax and then they get one Suns pick and one lesser valuable pick and yeah, maybe like a deep swap or something like 2.5 picks, one of which is very good, plus ducking the tax. I think that's where it starts to get pretty interesting. Boston may say we want three, and we'll see how this year goes too, because if they're not very good, if they get to the trade deadline and they're below 500, they might say like one of the real values here is getting off of White so we can tank freely for the rest of the year, have a pretty high pick in 26, and then like if we have the Suns pick in 27, we can sort of do a version of what the Warriors did where they picked number 2 and then number 7. They obviously got those picks wrong with Kaminga and with Wiseman, but like getting 2 lottery picks in at that stage can be so valuable for you. I think they would probably be more interested in that world than if they've overperformed and if they're healthy and they're like, yeah, we're going to chase the 6 seed. Why not? But I think the raw number is between 2 and 3 picks, as long as one of those picks is very good.
I think Boston, if I'm Boston, I'm asking for both those Suns picks. I'm
Yeah, and
not
there's
saying they're
no
going to
way.
get him.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're going to get him, but at the very least, I think I'm asking for that at this point, given given Houston's predicament. Uh, and yeah, I think I feel like that's gonna be they might be able. I'm not saying they wouldn't for sure yet. I think though you got to push for that, uh, and it's possible you get it because if you're Boston, you made this point. If you're trading uh, one of Jaylen Brown or Derek White, it is for the pieces so you can get that next at least starter level, maybe extra all star guy that you can add to Jason Tatum. Uh, because when we were first talking about that, the Celtics didn't get into this position where getting below the tax was even a possibility. all we knew is that they got below the second apron by getting with their Porzingis and Holiday trades. They hadn't done the additional Niang trade, so they're gonna once they get below the tax, they're gonna be in a position where if they get below the tax again next year, they reset their repeater clock and they'll have like a 3 year window to just spend as much as they want. But so now that it's at the point where okay, we don't need to trade Derek White to save money. We're only going to trade Derek White for the premium value. So I think that's the ask, and I feel like if I'm Boston, yeah, you might not get those picks, both those Suns picks, but then at that point, I don't even know if I'm remotely interested in making that type of trading Derek White to Houston unless I get him both.
Yeah, my view on this is that if your plan is to just roll out the 26-27 team with a three-man core of Derek White, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown, you're kind of just like a 4 seed, and I'm not super interested in you. I think they have to think a lot more aggressively about totally remaking the team. And that doesn't only mean bringing in picks that you can then trade later. I think it probably does mean resetting the tax clock and making things a little bit more financially viable, especially because the 26-27 season, even if Tatum is back and like mostly looks like himself, given how much you've gutted the supporting cast, I don't see how that's going to be a championship caliber season anyway. So I don't mind throwing that away and saying our goal is like from 2027 through 2031, we're going to be in the championship mix with Tatum and Brown. I say you trade White to do that. Now, my other side of this is Houston. I don't think the 25-26 season is so important that you give away these premium assets for a guy like Derek White. Derek White's great and he would be very, very helpful for them. And there are other teams for whom giving up that much for White might make sense. I just look at Houston and I say, like, why are you giving up the assets that could get you Giannis Antetokounmpo to get Derek White? You have to be so certain that getting Derek White is going to make you a championship favorite to do that. And I just don't see how that path exists unless it's February 1st and Oklahoma City, for some reason or another, is out of the mix. And frankly, Denver probably is too. If it's February 1st and like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is out for the year and Jamal Murray is out for the year, sorry, Canada. I don't know why those are the two guys I came up with. But like if you are in that world where the Nuggets and Thunder are like basically out, then I say you go for it. But otherwise, I sort of look at that trade as like kind of Mikal Bridges ish, where, yeah, getting Mikal Bridges was very helpful for the Knicks. They probably don't beat Boston if they don't have Mikal Bridges last year. But trading for Mikal Bridges is probably why they're not going to be able to make a competitive bid for Giannis Antetokounmpo. I am just not putting myself in that position, period. I am not touching the Suns picks unless I'm trading them for an MVP or I'm holding on to them and just using them. So that way, given their youth and given how expensive they're about to get, if you get those picks right, if you get really good picks out of them, that could extend your runway like an extra 5, 6, 7 years, or maybe even like, oh, it turns out in 2027, the Suns had the number one pick, and you take somebody who's better than anybody else who's on your team already. I just think those assets are too valuable for a guy like Derek White. There are other teams that maybe are a Derek White away from like genuinely competing for the title. If Dallas wanted to make an all-in push for Derek White and say we're gonna have Derek White and Kyrie as our backcourt, I might buy that. There are a few other teams. I just don't think Houston should look at this and say that's worth the Suns picks. I think Houston should look at this and say, if we have to punt this year, we have to punt this year. But getting Derek White is like only kind of not a slight upgrade over Fred. He's a meaningful upgrade over Fred, but he's not like an all NBA upgrade over Fred. And that's what it would take for me to give up those Suns picks.
You're absolutely right. Like I said, I think the Celtics are within their right to ask for both those picks, and yeah, I don't think Houston should give into that. Even if they're like a 1 or 2 seed, and this could really having him could really help match up against OKC. Yeah, I don't think you do that type of trade. That's just not good value still. Uh, Last thing I just want to ask you is because we differ so greatly on where Houston stacks as far as the regular season goes, like how many games they'll win in the regular season. I'm looking at the teams in the West, and I'll just name like the 7 ones that I would, I expect will be in the top half, which would be Denver, Golden State, where we kind of already know what the team's going to look like, Clippers, Lakers, Wolves, uh, Thunder. That's six teams. Where does anything change as far as where Houston ranks against those six teams as far as the regular season goes?
I had Oklahoma City and Denver ahead of them. I had them as a firm number three, with I've been leaning the Lakers number four. You could tell me that the Lakers have jumped them. I'd maybe buy that. I think the Clippers have this giant anvil hanging over their heads, and I just don't feel good about like, oh yeah, sure, they're gonna be the number two seed, and then in February we're gonna find out that they actually cheated and they're like it's all gonna fall apart. I think that's going to be a major distraction all season. I just think Minnesota is a little overrated. I think of them as the team that almost fell into the play-in last year and not the team that made the Western Conference Finals. I frankly think that they made the Western Conference Finals because they got a very favorable matchup in the first round and Stephen Curry was hurt in the second round. Like this notion that because they made back-to-back Western Conference Finals, I have to take them seriously as a contender. I don't buy that at all. I think when they played Oklahoma City, they got smacked around for 5 games. And we kind of learned they're a middle tier West team, not an upper tier West team. I still think Houston's better. And then with Golden State, I just think the age as a regular season thing is so concerning. And like their big addition was Al Horford. I don't know what the resolution is going to be with Kaminga. If you told me they got Kaminga back on a contract that they could trade in the middle of the season at a reasonable cap number, I'd be pretty interested at that point, but I don't want to jump ahead of myself. So I would still probably have the Rockets, say, tied for third, if not a slight fourth. I have questions about the Lakers as well, but the Lakers, just by virtue of having the sheer talent that they do, I think maybe you could say are a slight edge at third, but I don't think they've fallen all that significantly. No.
So it's worth noting that last year, hold on, that's not regular season. I want to see what the difference was between like a third and like seventh seed. I'm sure what in the West it
It
wasn't that
wasn't
big a
big,
difference.
but I think it was bigger this year. Like I thought, like going into before the injury, I thought Oklahoma City was going to hover around 60 wins, and then I thought Houston and
Yeah,
Denver were going to be in the mid 50s.
a
And
two
I
game
don't
difference last
like,
year.
yeah, like I don't think this is going to be the West of the last few years where like the gap between number three and number nine is 2.5 games. I didn't feel that way.
Okay, so let's say it's more like a 4 or 5 game gap, which that's pretty reasonable in the West. I would say I think you're right on the Clippers, that whole uncertainty aspect, but if they didn't have that looming over the head, I think I'd have all six of these teams placing above Houston in the regular season.
We got to make a
So I
bet of
feel
some
like
sort on this.
uh
We bet
well
a dinner or something. Like we'll
I
figure
won't
out the
know.
line. Like it's number five seed or something because I'm just
Well,
way higher
yeah.
on them than you are.
We'll see. We'll need to see how things shake out. Look, the thing is, like, it kind of just shows how competitive this West team is. All these teams are really good, but not all of them are going to finish above the play-in. Uh, and Houston's a team that I've been very bullish on the past 2 years, as in like 2 years ago when they almost made snuck into the play-in. I thought they'd be in the play-in. And then last year, I predicted they'd be above. I didn't have the podcast like we're doing it now, so no, it doesn't really matter. I'm saying it now, but I thought I predicted they'd be above the play-in, and they did. I'm not saying I'm like the I know these Rockets too well, or but I just so far been pretty consistent, and now I'm a little more bearish on them. But that's not really saying that they can't still win a playoff series or anything like that. Like again, we see how close these teams are 1 through 8. It's just that like just given how stacked the West is, two very talented teams are gonna at least 2 to 3 talented teams are gonna be in the play-in, and I'm afraid Houston just might be one of them. That's all.
I mean, I'll put it this way. It's at least somewhat plausible now. And the other thing that we always disregard with injuries is whenever somebody gets hurt, we always assume they're the last guy that's going to get hurt. And we're looking at the Rockets as if oh wow, they're going to go 82 games where they only have Reed and Amon as their ball handlers, and it's more on Kevin Durant, but they'll have Kevin Durant. Other guys are going to get hurt, and like we'll see how that pans out. Durant is 36 and going to turn 37 in like a week. I maybe would be a little bit worried about his health, and like Dorian Finney-Smith has some concerns with the knee, and like we'll see. Like I want to see how healthy everybody is. I understand some measure of skepticism on that front, but that roster is so deep, and I think the best guys are so diverse in what they can do. And I have so much faith in the younger guys that, look, this is a hit. I'm not going to pretend it's not, but I think it's one that they're equipped to overcome.
Sam, tell everyone where they can find you and what you got coming up in the pipeline.
Sam Quinn CBS on Twitter, read CBS Sports. I've got a whole bunch of stuff coming out. I wrote about Fred. We're recording on Monday night. I want to say it's going to publish tomorrow morning. I've written some Kawhi stuff that's either come out or will come out soon. I've got some preseason trade stories coming out later this week. Just there's always stuff to be written. And in the next coming weeks, I'll probably have something significant to publish almost every day in the build up to the season. So just read CBS Sports, you'll find everything there.
Thanks for joining me as usual. Everyone, you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky. My name is Goslin. Please subscribe to Third Apron wherever you get your podcast and the Substack. Been pretty active there, doing a lot of just covering a lot of the most recent moves. Hopefully, we get a resolution to Quentin Grimes, Jonathan Kuminga. I could touch on those situations. And for those watching the video, enjoy this background, this backdrop I've been having, just my room, because I'm about to move and I'm going to have my own office again, my own studio. Ever since my son was born, I had to put everything in my bedroom, but that's it. It's going to be a nice setup. So the next time you see me, it's going to look a whole lot different. So, yeah, we'll see you guys soon.